Block management, a very grandiose title now. So we're looking at management agreements, leadership, and contractors. Now, before I start, I have a tiny bit of housekeeping. So this is where I do my Professor Witty bit. Thank you very much. Next slide. How to interact with us today. This is the whole point of this, is to be interactive. It's not for Shelley, Martin, and I to drone on at you. So please do ask us some questions that are bothering you if they're relevant to the topics. Go off piste if you really want. We'll, if we can, we'll accommodate them, but try and keep a little bit to the topics we're talking about. So there's a Q&A panel, just to let you know, that will be moderated. So if somebody asks an inappropriate question, that won't find its little way through to us. And I'm afraid all participants, apart from the three of us, are muted. That's just to stop, dogs barking in the background and doorbells going, which we all know. So that's the intro. Can I have the next slide, please, Laura? The ever-present and unfortunate disclaimer: all content presented in this webinar is for general information purposes and should not be considered as legal advice or official guidance. I always find it sad we have to say that, but so be it. Onwards we go. So we have certainly a rose between two thorns, to put it mildly there. We have Shelley, who is the operations director of MLM, who will be looking, who's a psychologist and an expert on all things to do with that, and we'll be having that in the second session. And Mr. Martin Perry, ex-chair of Armour, so he and I have known each other a long, long time, owner and director of West of England, and Martin's here to look more at the practical and operational aspects of some of the things we're discussing. So thank you to the two panelists for giving up their time, not just today, but also the advanced time as well, for prep, etc. Shall we move on? Next slide, please. So 3 areas today. We've got a private bet that we won't get to contractor management, simply because when we rehearsed this, we pretty much only just got past contracts and half of leadership. So we'll see how we go. But it's there in spare at the background if we need it. If not, we'll actually probably have to then do that for a separate session. So looking at contracts, we're looking at management agreements, leadership. So we're bringing in there, or Shelley in particular will bring in there, well-being and how to treat staff, etc., etc., and contractor management, as it says on the tin, how best to manage your contractors. So if we can move first on to contracts. So Martin, here I'm talking about the management agreement. That thing that when you first meet somebody, you send it over, you get kind of happy when it's signed, and then it goes in the drawer and gets dust. Is that all it should be, or is actually something, is it an important document? And if so, where do you think we're actually not taking the management agreement and using it properly?
Well, I think the management agreement can be an important document and probably should be. And I think it's probably a tool to help us all try and increase our profitability. It is very easy just to take a standard format, get it agreed with clients. And I think those of us who went through ArmourQ a few years ago were probably all guilty of having a few clients without management agreements in place, and there was a bit of catch up there. It's often seen as a one-time job. You do it, you put it in the scanner, and then you don't look at it again until year dot when something goes wrong. But I think there are elements in there which we can think about usefully to set out for the clients the expectations that they should have of us and the expectations that we should have of the clients, and the points at which we reach a boundary where we're going to come back and say, look, that isn't within our remit. We're going to charge you some more money on a reasonable basis for this.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting part, isn't it? Because
but there's a balance to be struck, because you could write War and Peace on that. Yeah. And obviously, if you present that to a potential client, they're going to run a mile, aren't they? Yeah. So I think there's a useful middle ground here. But I'm hoping that one of the things that might come out of discussions today is perhaps to identify some of those particular operational issues or problems that we have, where we could put them in a contract list and say, look, guys, we don't do that for standard. We're going to want some more money, but also expectations of how we want the clients to behave as clients. And one of the big things for me is getting clear instructions. If you've got to scratch around trying to lead a group to a decision, that's a really, really time-consuming process. Whereas if in the contract, you make it very clear that what you want is clear instructions from clients in certain situations, and they need to organise themselves as a group, be it directors or leaseholders, to come to a decision and give you that instruction. Then I think there's a potential win for us there.
So how would you recommend managing clients? Because you and I have talked about this before, that if you're lucky, you might get shown around a property before you sign up for it, and that under the current scenario, you kind of say, oh, I'll do this for X pounds per annum. Obviously, we don't want to go to actual numbers. We can talk about the philosophy. And then, sure as anything happens, something will crop up. And the client will say, well, that's what you do, isn't it? I want you to come round to my house on Sunday evening after I've had dinner for a meeting. And I've said I don't do Sundays, and I've got the, well, maybe you shouldn't be in this business then reply. It's very difficult to manage clients. And that's me as an owner. It's even harder for property managers because, of course, they want to maintain a relationship. And it's, in a sense, no skin off their nose if they say, oh, okay, I'll do that. But the owner then is paying a property manager to do work that they're not being compensated for.
Yeah, I think there's an extent to which you've got to be firm with client groups and explain to them that, make them understand that you need to have a life, that if you're expected to turn out evenings and weekends, you're not going to have any staff because people aren't going to want to come and work for you in that situation. But also to make the point to them that all of the sort of extra running around stuff you do stops you from doing the job you're supposed to be doing, which is dealing with budgeting, accounts preparation, repairs and maintenance schedule, all the compliance stuff. And I think there's a need for us to be firm with clients so that we can demonstrate to them that we've got sufficient time to deal with things efficiently and proactively for them on the basis of our contractual obligations, rather than getting drawn down rabbit holes which take endless amounts of time, or going to see people, as you say, Nigel, on Sunday evenings.
It's tricky, isn't it? You've got, I go back to my time. We have our second biggest client who's basically threatening me with, well, if that's the way you're going to act. And this was, he paid a mate of his £2,000 to be a company secretary. I can take that number, and wanted us to do all the company secretarial work. And I was going, well, we're not your company secretary. And we got the old, well, if you want this contract, then you better do all that work. And second biggest client, that was a really hard one. And I must admit, we caved in. So I remember sitting in the office at 8 o'clock on a Friday night, stuffing envelopes with the property manager to send out to a couple hundred people.
But then go back and say, look, guys, we want a single point of contact for your group, your leasehold group, or your board. If we don't have a single point of contact, there will be an additional fee. There'll be a loading to your annual retainer, if you like, because it's going to be hard work. If they have an active board of directors, do they have a chairman who's doing a chairman's job, i.e. leading the board to decisions and organising the board? Because if you've got to do that as well, I found that over my career enormously time consuming. You get some sort of semi-willing directors, but none of them wants to step up and actually take charge for the operation of that group. And trying to draw them to decisions, or even draw them together to have discussions, can be extremely time consuming. So again, have you got a chairman for your board? If you haven't got a chairman for your board and you want us to do that, that's going to be some additional time costs. So you can factor that in.
And taking that back to the management agreement, what we do is have separate documents for those additional services like COSEC or, collecting ground rents or whatever. So it's a separate document to the management agreement. So it's very clear right from the beginning that if you want us to do that sort of bolt-on service, there is a fee for it, so that it's not confused with the day-to-day management. And I think that's quite important to establish that from the beginning, so that there's no sort of, issues later on when you're into the management of, misexpectations of, well, I assumed that you were going to do that as part of your service. Well, no, we don't do that for everybody. We do it when it's requested, and this is on the basis that we're going to do it, and this is our fee for it. Which I think is important.
What about, have to be very careful with anti-competitionals about pricing models, but I think if I was pointing a finger, Ricks, when they read the third edition, said that a fixed price is the preferred method. And then we all sort of then just took that to, well, that's what you've got to do. Having talked to an anti-competition lawyer, he said that's illegal for a start, because you're telling people how they should price, which you shouldn't do. And when I talked to the FGTP, they said, we don't care how you charge it, as long as it's fair and reasonable. And so to my mind, there's, this fixed fee is a strange one, because they've all got pros and cons. You know exactly what your cash flow is going to be, service your client. But conversely, it's a bit of an open-ended buffet, as we've all found. And in a sense, that's unfair, because it means good sites tend to subsidize bad sites. Because I don't think, certainly in the early days, you don't really know how good or bad a site is. So you just put your standard price in and keep your fingers crossed. That is, to me, an interesting thing, that should we be looking at capturing time? And you don't have to charge for time, because that again, is one way of doing it. But if nothing else, to my mind, you should be thinking about how much time does a client take up, because there might be things you can do about it. It might be Nutty Nigel in, flat 1 writes every day and I have to respond to it. So, dear board, can you do something about this? Because I can't as a managing agent. I have to respond to Nigel, who's constantly doing that. So I think there's that to me is ways to do it. And of course, that way you'll start identifying sites that are frankly loss leading, because leaseholders look at their service charge as a whole. And we've all had that, I pay you £2,000 to manage my block. Managing agents tend to look at what they charge, but I'm not sure many of them actually work out what their profit is. And it can be very small. So when a big site says, oh, look, if you knock off 10 quid, you've got it, and you'll go, what's a big site? Yeah, I'll do that. You actually might from them be working for free. I've been guilty of that as well.
I think the difficulty with the sort of that pricing structure of time is whose time are you actually measuring? Is it just the property manager? What about all the back end accounting functions, which probably takes up more time than your property manager? So, whilst in theory that's a good idea, from a practical perspective,
it's error number 1. Sorry,
it's a challenge. Whose time are you actually monitoring in that way?
And I agree, and I think measuring time is really difficult, because we are usually doing so many different things at once, or almost at once. Every managing agent's day is filled with countless different clients and countless different matters, and you're often jumping from one to the other at very short time if you're trying to catch up on emails or dealing with phone calls or visitors to the office, or any number of things. It's not as if you've just got a file for a property out for the morning, and you can go back and say, well, I've spent 3 hours on your building this morning, nice, consistent, quiet, diligent work. And so there's a time charge. So I think actually capturing what we're working on is really, really complex. There certainly aren't any products out there that I know of that, that are available for managing agents to be able to record time. There is a time clock on fixed flow. Here we go, fixed flow plugs. On issues, if you set the issue up in a certain type of way, but you've got to remember to open the issue, put the time clock on as soon as you start working on that matter. And you might find that you've been on a phone call for 20 minutes and you haven't remembered to do that. So that sort of manual effort involved in doing that time recording, I think, is really tricky for managing agents.
No, I understand that. I mean, when I went out to Australia, and that is the mechanism they use, at least in Queensland. They basically say it's like $100 to manage you, and I'll set your AGM up for that, and then every 6 minutes after that is X.
Yeah.
And that gives the clients, actually, I suppose the attraction, that gives the clients the attraction to kind of go, well, I'll do it all then, fine, knock yourself out, or I want you to do everything, or something in between. Certainly,
Nigel, there's a comment on from William Henniker, who you might remember.
Mr. Henniker.
And William, hello, William. William says extra services is a real minefield for us. Really difficult, as Nigel has highlighted, to say no, particularly for bigger blocks that we don't want to go through, get tough with, for fear of sparking a retendering process. Yeah. And that's a really interesting point. And it would be interesting to see what members or people on the session today's feedback is about how the market's looking for them. How competitive does it feel out there? How robust are people able to be with their pricing? Are they being actively undercut? Because this has always been the difficulty for us, hasn't it? Is we try to be robust and pay ourselves properly to resource the job properly, only to find that there's a startup, or another agency decided to branch out into block management for a bit and are offering really, really low fees.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see what people feel the climate's like out there in terms of, whether there's more work than businesses can manage to expand to take on, or whether they're actually having to fight against retendering and sort of cost control from clients all the time.
Yeah, I certainly encountered that retendering, which is just generally an argument to don't you dare charge us for anything, even if it's fair and reasonable and not in the contract, or else. And it is a worry, which is what I mentioned. Yeah, it's a tricky one. That I still think it's a good idea to know which of your sites are chewing up a lot of your time. I agree that having a clock on your desk is not how we operate. But I mean, certainly in previous careers I've been in, just at the end of the month, you said to somebody, roughly what time did you spend? 10% on this, 5 on that. And then that gives you an idea of where the time is going. And then you can, if something is particularly difficult, you can start honing in on that and finding out why that one is time intensive. And like I say, it might be Nutty Nige in flat 1 that's just taking up all the time. Because as I said earlier, I suppose that the property manager quite understandably just wants an easy life. You want me to do that? Yeah, I'll do it, because it's not worth me upsetting the apple cart and ruining the relationship. But it's difficult for the property owner, who then is effectively paying staff to do work that they're not getting any recovery on. It is a really, really tricky one. And part of it, I think, is the professionalisation, which Caroline was on about, that people don't, I still don't think people see property management as a profession. It's just seen as a necessary evil, and that you have to put up with these people that just send me a bill every now and again and don't do anything. It was quite a shock coming to this industry. And I think this, I'll do everything you want, no matter what, doesn't help with that professional image.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that, and I think we have to I think we have to be a bit bolder and a bit braver sometimes and say no, and to protect the fees that we think we should charge. And we, as an industry, we need to sort of get a different message out there, and that we are professional, and as Caroline mentioned, we wouldn't treat solicitors, or people wouldn't treat solicitors in the same way. So I think there's some work still to do on really getting people to understand what it means to be a managing agent. Because when I talk to people who don't own a flat, don't know anything about the sector, they're quite shocked at the volume of work and depth of knowledge it takes to do what we do.
There's a comment from Emma here: people are undercutting, but I'm being bolder with fees. I think everyone in the industry must do this, as we have so much more legislative change we must now deal with. It's a really good point. I think, Nigel, in Armour days, there used to be a document which was a compilation of the bits of legislation that managing agents, or that related to managing agents' work, that we had to comply with. I don't know if that still exists.
Yes, it still does. And there was another document about what does a managing agent do, so you can give that.
Yeah, indeed. So something of that sort, that you could put to a client or a prospective client and say, well, look, whoever you appoint, this is the list of stuff that they need to know about. And that they need to make sure that if it's an RMC, you guys are compliant with, to avoid you having any unforeseen liabilities or problems.
Something it's not on the questions, it's something I want to ask Shelley about, which is fair and reasonable. I use the example of Nutty Nige in flat 1. There has to be a stage that you go, I can't deal with you anymore, because this is not fair, this is not reasonable. And does that mean you leave the property, or are there options available to you where you can, serve a cease and desist, a deadlock letter, or unreasonable behaviour policy, or talk to the board? We've all experienced that, where somebody just hoovers up enormous amounts of your time. Yeah. Generally not because of you. They've got a beef against the landlord, whoever that landlord happens to be, and you're just a conduit to them. But what do you think we can do in those sort of circumstances, Shelley?
So I think, in the first instance, it's really trying to understand what's really going on behind the scenes. Why is that person causing so much of an issue? We know that there are people who just like to be litigious and cause trouble, but more often than not, there's something else going on. So it tends to work where you have quite a frank conversation with that person. And if that doesn't work, then it's about discussing with the board. And we've all been in that situation where sometimes we have to walk away from instructions because those few people take up so much time and cause so much stress to our staff that it is better to walk away. I'm not saying that's a great thing, but sometimes that is the ultimate solution, which isn't brilliant. But I think in the first instance, it's trying to really understand and try and work with that person. But if it's not working, then sometimes, we have to walk away.
Yeah, it's not easy, because people will say, oh, well, bus drivers, they say, I'm not moving this bus unless. But of course, they can say that, whereas we have to engage with that person the next day, come what may. You can't just say, right, I'm never talking to you again. It's just not one that's available to us.
It's very difficult, very, very difficult. And we've been in that situation, and walking away is the last resort. But sometimes, for the sake of our staff and their stress levels, that's the only way, unfortunately.
Mm. Moving back to sort of the management agreement, I know some people looked at the concepts of, bronze, silver, and gold. So instead of this, I'll do it all for X pounds, whatever. It's, well, what do you want? If you want me to meet you once a month during office hours, and I'll do a monthly site visit, then that's this. And that then gave a scope that when somebody did come back and say, oh, sorry, it's Friday evenings, we need to see you now, you can go, well, we can do that, but then that's, as per the contract, silver level or gold level or whatever. Have either of you come across that or even employed that sort of mechanism?
We haven't. We've been approached from time to time by people who've wanted us to do only part of the work, be it the secretarial side or the financial side, and we've always shied away from it, really. As personally, I feel it's very difficult to divorce one aspect of block management from another, and to stop yourself just getting pulled into stuff. And I think it would be, what would the operational model look like in the office? Would you have one PM for the gold, 1 PM for the silver, 1 for the bronze, or do you have property managers with a mixture of all of them? And then the PMs have got to make operational decisions on the hoof, haven't they, all day about whether they're actually supposed to be doing this. And if they're not supposed to be doing it, they've got to explain to the client that that's not within the management agreement. And the client might not be, that might be a leaseholder who hasn't been privy to the management agreement, other than they might have a copy of the sort of operational service elements of it, not the negotiations. I don't know. So I see that as a complicated approach, but I stand to be corrected. I don't know if there's anybody on today who's successfully employed that model. Let's hear from you if there is.
I agree with you, Martin. I kind of have this vision of somebody calling up and then somebody taking that call and then going, oh, let me just check which level of service. Oh, no, you're on the bronze service. We can't help you. That just, to me, I agree with Martin. I don't think operationally that's very practical. But similar to what you said, Martin, we have been approached to do certain aspects of the job, for example, just supporting people with major works. So where it's very, very clear that we're just doing X, I think that can work as long as it's very clear and that we don't get dragged in. But the concept of a different service level, I think that would be difficult. And I'm so interested to see if anyone else has applied that model, because I can't see how it really works on the ground.
Interesting. One for you, Shelley, here, which is rather sad one. In this day and age with dementia or becoming more prevalent, how do we deal with older clients who eat up our time? Do not listen and simply go over the same thing every time they ring. It's kind of back to, it's not an aggressive person, it's just somebody who's...
It's, again, very difficult. We've got a few of those leaseholders, and unfortunately, it does require a bit more of a personal approach. We also have in some of our buildings people with very severe mental health issues, and that have been quite challenging. So where it's possible, and obviously done sensitively, we ask if that person has someone else that we can contact on their behalf and that they give us permission to do that. But yes, it is really hard, but we have to be human at the end of the day. And obviously people with dementia or mental health issues, we have to try our best. But yeah, it is difficult, but where possible, if it's an option to speak to a family member instead, that would be the best advice. That's what we try to do.
Okay. I think that's our time done on the management contract. I think the summary there, I think it is vital. It's something that we should discuss with the clients in a lot more detail when you first sit down, rather than just that thing you throw at them and say, just sign on the bottom of page 4, please. And then, as you say, Martin, we tend to put it in a drawer then, except when it's time to apply the RPICs or something. I think, like you said, when I sold my company, we realized about 40% of our sites didn't have a management agreement. And it was a bit of a flattery, because we go around the boards and say, yeah, we know you guys, you're great, don't worry about it. We just didn't have time to do it, but it's really difficult to get it through. But it should set out the relationship. Doesn't always do that, I feel, but there you go. Right. Anything else you want to add, Shelley, Martin, before we move on to leadership? Last sage words, or are you happy to move on?
I think it's a difficult issue, the management agreement. I don't think we're going to solve it today, but it remains a challenge.
Yeah, I think if we had time, it would be lovely to be able to do a sort of data capture for each site each year. Yeah. So that when you do the budget, part of that conversation with the clients is, how's it been for us?
Yeah.
But that involves keeping specific records of what's gone on, and that all takes time, and we're short of time. So it's tricky, isn't it?
And as Shelley said, a lot of the time is invisible. You know, when I've explained my fees to somebody in the past and said account, they go, ah, you know, there's 10,000 invoices that have had to be processed here and paid and verified, and bank accounts. You know, it's all hidden from you. That you don't realise all this enormous amount of work that gets done in the background. All people see is the property manager wandering around, or the lift not working, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much for that, both of you, and to the audience for the questions. Moving on, next, leadership. This is more into, I was about to say more into Shelley's. That doesn't mean you're not a leader, Martin. It just means it's Shelley's area of expertise.
I'm perfectly happy not being a leader, Nigel. That's absolutely fine, thanks. I'm going to go and be a gardener, I think, eventually. That's my plan.
I'll join you. Okay. So we're looking here about what is leadership, how do you manage staff, aspects around it, such as things like 4-day weeks, etc., etc. Is it just fluffy bunny stuff, or is it important to business? Shelley, over to you, please.
So I wanted to sort of bring this topic to the fore today, because over the last few years in our industry, as we know, we've been talking about well-being, which is important. We need to keep that conversation going, absolutely. But one of the potential challenges is that a lot of organisations are putting in wellbeing programs, which is great. Please do that. But if I worked for a company that had the best wellbeing program ever, it had, let's say, an employee assistance program. I've heard of fresh fruit being delivered every day, extra time off, people coming in giving massages, gym memberships, blah, blah, blah. If I had all of that, that'd be great. But if my manager treated me badly, if my manager treated me unfairly, was unkind, didn't support my career and all those things, am I going to have well-being at work? No, I'm not. So for me, I think that as part of the well-being conversation, we need to really think about leadership skills. And when I say leadership skills, I'm not just talking about organisational leaders, anyone that manages a person or people in the workplace. We need to up our game a little bit. And I think that's so important because we're living in difficult times. We're working, you know, a lot of us working in hybrid ways. We need to get back to being more human, and we need to really focus on how we treat people, particularly in our industry. We've got very high, turnover of staff for a lot of organisations. So we need to work harder to treat our people better so that they stay, so that they feel supported, nurtured, all of that stuff. So, Martin, obviously you run a business. What are your thoughts on
yeah, that? Absolutely. I completely support that. I mean, for me, recruiting even property managers with any direct experience where we are in Bath is hard because it's such a small sector. Recruiting and keeping good people is difficult. And I've sort of learned over the years that you've got to be quite nice to work for because property management is a very challenging job. It's not for everybody. Let's be straight. It's not the most highly paid end of the professional property sector. And I think that you've got to put people in a situation that suits them as part of the package of keeping them in this industry, which is a shame. It would be lovely if we could pay everybody twice as much. And, it could be a career choice on a par with other things that have already been alluded to in comments today, solicitors, perhaps surveyors, accountants, but at the moment we're still not there, are we? So giving people a good working environment and appropriate support, I think, is absolutely critical for us in this industry.
Yeah,
it's kind of a bit of a club, isn't it? Block managers. We sometimes think, how do we end up here? But those that like it develop a love for it, and it's sort of fostering that kind of mentality, I think, in the workplace for us that's borne fruit over the years.
How do we learn that skill, though? Because we're not all born Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great, and we go and we start a small firm, and then we we hire some staff, and unless you've had training, it's kind of hard to know how to treat people. It is a skill. It's not in your DNA. Maybe it is for Julius Caesar, but not for the rest of us. How do we actually start learning that?
Go on a TPI training course, Nigel. Is that what happens?
Fine by me. I think there are people who are born with natural leadership skills, but it is a skill that can be learned. So I run a course for Armour, and I teach people how to do it better. And it is about just being more aware of a lot of the things that we do, being more, showing more empathy, thinking about treating people fairly and what we consider to be fair and perhaps not be, things like unconscious bias, how we make decisions in the workplace and not factor in people. There's so many things that we can learn how to do better, no matter which stage of your career you're at, whether you're just starting out or, done it for many years. And, as an organizational leader, when I was studying the psychology of leadership, I thought, well, I know it all, I've done it for years. But actually, when I learn't myself about, everything that goes into great leadership, I came away thinking, wow, actually, I thought I knew it, but really I didn't. And there was so much to learn. So I think it's so important that we take stock and actually, think about how to up those skills. And as I said, shameless plug, come and do my course, because we cover a whole variety of different aspects of leadership. And just to repeat, it's not just about organizational leaders, although it is about them because they set the tone and, that impacts organizational culture and all that kind of stuff. But anyone that is responsible for managing a human, we can up our game, because ultimately people work for people. Yes, you work for a company, but people work for people and people leave people. So no matter where you are in your leadership journey, you can always up your skills, which I think is important.
I mean, something that struck me about the industry was the high rate of churn we have in businesses. Some of that I find is not for the right reasons. I mean, I've lost property managers who were frankly not property managers. We were training them, but somebody else has said, you can be a property manager, I'll offer you 50% more. And to be fair, they've come to me and said, this firm's offered me 50% more, would you like to match it? And we've gone, well, no, because being blunt, you're not worth that at this stage. You've only got 6 months under your belt. You need a bit more, and we have this plan for you. But the churn does concern me, because it's a drain on your top management time. Mm-hmm. Recruitment fees are not funny, as we know. Hopefully nobody from recruitment is going to have a go at me there. It's really bad for clients. And again, clients quite understandably hate the fact that this is my 4th property manager in 2 years. What sort of a business are you running? Yeah. Churn is a difficult thing here. And I don't know, there is no magic answer to churn. As you say, people leave people, but sometimes there are.
I'm not sure that's an exclusive problem to property management, actually. I mean, I think, we all have experience of talking to other business principals who are experiencing similar situations. Job market's a lot more fluid than it was when I started 30 years ago. And I think we probably have to have a certain expectation that we're going to have to deal with a degree of this, not just because of people coming in and out of property management per se, but because they're looking to move, because people like to look to move these days.
And that's why how we treat our people every single day is even more important. We need to make it more difficult for people to want to leave because they have it so great where they are. But there are other factors in that when we look at very young people, and this is not a millennial bashing comment, but when we look at young people who are coming into the industry, they are the instant gratification generation. That's not a moan and groan, that's just the reality. So young people tend to want the next exciting thing very quickly, whereas, as we know, to become a property manager, it takes a long time, and you can have been doing it for 20 years. You get a new property that's got some new bit of kit that you have to learn something new, so you never stop learning. So what's happening, I think, in our industry in particular, is young people are coming in. Let's say they'll stay for 6 months, and they get itchy feet because they want something new and exciting. So the company then offers them a bit more money to stay, and money's not really the motivator. That person might stay for an extra few months and then will go anyway. The employer thinks, well, that's great, I got an extra few months out of them, so they're not that bothered. But what's then happening is that young person is going to the next company, they're getting paid even more money. So we're starting to see that trend of people who are going through their career quite quickly but not having the necessary skills and experience, and the salaries are going up and up and up. And I think that is an issue for us as an industry, because we're sort of missing that very specific career trajectory pattern that you see in a lot of other industries. So I think that that's a part to play. It's not the whole story, but either way, bring you back to leadership, how we treat people can help to keep them in the job. But yeah, I think the young people issue, I think that's something we need to think about and try and manage that slightly differently.
I think there might be a silver lining to the sort of black cloud of all this legislation coming, because there are potentially new careers, building safety or net zero, et cetera, within a property management structure. I'm not saying you can be a specialist in net zero unless you're in a very large firm, but there are new things starting to come our way. Whether they're good as a whole in legislation, but I know that they pose a legislative and admin burden on everybody. But it is becoming a more diverse job in terms of what people are being asked to do.
Yeah, and I think that that's a good thing. And I think, one aspect of leadership is to talk to people about their career and help them on their journey. And yeah, you're right, there's a lot of different avenues opening up. And I think it is, I know we talk about the doom and gloom aspects of property management, leaseholders and all that, but actually, I think that there's a lot of great aspects to the job. I think it's never boring. Every day is different. And as you said, Nigel, lots of different pathways. But people need to have those conversations with their employees and help them on their journey, which actually is a motivating factor for people at work. So I think that's important to think about and to help people along their career path in the right way. Yeah.
I think there's also quite an important piece about supporting staff in terms of how they manage their workflow. Because Shelley, you're right, property management is never boring. You're never twiddling your thumbs, and although it's kind of the same stuff going on each year, it's always got different clothes on, and it's happening at a different building or with different groups of people or different contractors or whatever. But I think the most significant thing that we all have to manage is the volume of stuff that comes at us every day and that we're trying to deal with every day. And I found it really useful trying to help staff implement systems so that they can effectively manage that workflow themselves, because we all know how easy it is to just get lost in emails all day. To try and get on top of emails, and you can spend the whole day doing it, and you still haven't got there, so you don't feel very satisfied, and then you've still got a list of things that you should have done that day that you haven't done, and then the next day can be the same. And so trying to set out sort of more structured ways for people to work to be able to manage volume of workflow, I think is really helpful.
Yeah, and that comes down to our sort of time management skills and how we use our time. And unfortunately, when we look at that, a lot of people waste time. It doesn't seem like it, but if you waste 30 minutes every day, that equates to over 3 weeks of work in a year that you're frittering away. So actually helping, you're right, Martin, helping people to actually work more productively is also very important. And again, that's a skill that can be taught, which again is something, there's an expectation that everyone knows how to be organised and work in an organised way, which is absolutely not the case at all. A lot of people actually struggle with just general organisation. So we need to, again, support people in that way as well.
I think we're going to have a problem with the funnel of people coming into the business. We saw a lot of people when COVID came switching over from the hospitality business. It's a very fungible asset. I'm sure some of them are now heading back, but we have hybrid working, maybe working from home, which pros and cons, but one of the cons, a big con for me, is people new into the industry. Working from home is quite lonely, and you're not picking up, as we said, by osmosis, what's going on around you. And so I do kind of worry that we're going to have a gap of people coming in or not, and leaving quickly, or not even coming in the next few years, because of sort of what's happening in the job markets as well.
Yeah, and particularly when you take on very young people. So we've in the past taken on 16-year-olds where it's their first job and we're teaching them literally how to work. So I agree that, I'm a big fan of hybrid working, but I do think that is a challenge. And the way that we're managing that is to spend time with that person initially in their first few months, having a bit more presence. But it does require a different set of skills as a manager when you're dealing with somebody in a hybrid way. And during the pandemic, we were recruiting people and having to do all the training and everything online. Very, very difficult. But you're right, the young people coming into the industry, they do need support, and that's again why they need more sort of human-centered approach to how they're being managed and help them on their journey. I think it can be done. I think it just needs it needs a bit of a revamp and a rethink. And obviously a lot of companies are working in that hybrid way. So it's about shifting how we manage people, and using the tools. Video conferencing is great. I wouldn't recommend it all day, but there's lots of different ways which we can actually engage people. It's not quite the same as being in the office, but then the concept of the workplace then becomes slightly different. It becomes more of a space for collaboration. So I don't think it's the death of the workplace. I think the workplace still has value, and especially for young people or new people coming into your organisation. But it's just about managing that in a slightly better way.
And Martin, I know you got some practical outcome of hybrid working, haven't you?
Yeah, we did what everyone else did and moved over to working from home during the pandemic, and we've halved our office space now, and we're on a rota where we see everybody at least once a week. Not everybody sees everybody at least once a week because of the way the rota works. I have to say, I wouldn't have dreamed of offering people home working beforehand, but it actually works pretty well. And I think the feedback we have from staff is that although they miss some of the interaction, I think it actually suits them being at home quite a lot more, particularly those who have family lives to manage around their work as well. And certainly electronically, you can do most of it, can't you? From a laptop, wherever you are.
But you don't get the decompression, do you?
You don't get the decompression. I agree. So it has prompted us to have a more structured approach to getting staff together with property management meetings and general get-togethers, which actually we were a bit lazy about before. So that's kind of an improvement, I guess. The particular difficulty is bringing new staff on, though, because they're not immediately in that collective setting in the office, just being able to learn on the hoof by seeing whatever else is going on or immediately asking questions. So that certainly needs more management and more structure around it than it used to. But it's.
And I guess you don't feel like you're part of a team, do you? Because
no, so
you need that person next to you.
Yeah.
A decompression, by the way, for everybody. I mean, personally, I used to find the commute home from the office was great. It meant I could just readjust. Whereas I'm sitting at my desk and then it's dinner time. I've turned around, go straight to dinner, and my mind is still in work, and it's my home that I'm working in. Got a couple of comments here, Alan. Fascinating. Is there a recording? Yes, there is. So that's going. Great comment, Martin. Any tips? Unfortunately, that was at 11:39 from Emma. So I've got to try and think out what that great comment was, because Martin, of course, all your comments are great. Do you think there's a need for all staff to be office-based? And I think we've just covered that one. Here's an interesting one. Somebody basically saying, I'm 56. How can I make progress within property management? Interesting, because we were just been saying that we're missing people and there's holes in and this person seems to be extremely well qualified.
Yeah, so, I'm really surprised and a bit disappointed by that.
Yeah.
Maybe look at smaller rather than larger firms. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think smaller firms would love that wealth of knowledge. Absolutely. So yeah, that doesn't sound great, but yeah, my advice would be smaller firms would love that experience.
Yeah.
As a small firm employer, I'm always attracted to people in that age bracket, I have to say. There are significant advantages which we won't go into.
What are we talking about there, Martin?
I'm just making some sort of general comments, Nigel. But, no, absolutely. But I think people who've been around the block make good property managers.
Yes.
Because you've got to deal with an awful lot of different people, and the more life you've had doing that, it gives you a skill set which can be really, really valuable.
And people with that wealth of experience, really good for young people to learn from. So really, really good.
No, yeah, it is wonderful. Somebody can say, I've come across this before, and this is how it panned out last time. So you don't have to learn by a mistake. Somebody's actually been there and said, this is a weird one, but I'm familiar with it. So yeah, really surprised that, and as Martin said, disappointed that somebody with that level of experience is having difficulty making progress. Very surprised.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like we lose our bet because I think unless there's anything else on leadership, we didn't talk about 4-day weeks and all that sort of stuff, but we covered the hybrid. Any last comments, and then we can quickly whiz on to contractor management. We've got 15 minutes left.
Just come on to my course. Again, shameless plug.
Shameless plug. That's what we're waiting for. Right, contractor management. So this is, we all have a group of contractors. Before we leap in, the very first question, back to Emma, we can whiz into that one. Hopefully you'll cover this on the contractors. The RICS code says we should have criteria in place, which includes checking identity, so they'll know your client. I asked for director's ID, such as passport, and many don't want to provide it. Do we need this level of ID, or is just checking the company's house sufficient? Try to ask RICS. Martin, shall I go to you first?
I shall lay myself bare to criticism by confessing that if I understand what this is saying right, I've never checked a contractor's identity in my life in that way.
As in asking for a passport, you look at PI and all that sort of stuff, make sure they're covered and credit check. But yeah, Shelley, what about you?
We ask for it from clients for RICS, but not from contractors. We go through quite a robust contractor vetting process where we get copies of their insurance and check the levels of insurance and all that kind of stuff, but not director's ID for contractors. No. Yeah,
also I've never asked for that.
No, it's an interesting one.
This introduces a real area of tension, I think, doesn't it? Where your vetting processes, which you need to employ for compliance, can actually be a significant deterrent to smaller tradespeople coming to work for you, because either they don't have the paperwork in place, or they don't have the time or the inclination to give it to you. They don't like an officious approach to how you're managing them. Yet they can actually be some of the best value tradespeople to put in situations for the clients, because they haven't got masses of overheads and they're local and flexible, and sometimes very skilled and often really, really nice people. So it's sometimes difficult being able to cover both sides of that conflict. And I think this would probably be a good example. You to go to a small tradesperson and ask him to do some work, and then you ask him to prove who he is, and you're sort of on the back foot already, aren't you, in terms of the working relationship, I think. There was a really, are we in a situation at the moment, is this everybody's experience, where we need these contractors more than they need us? Is that, because that's how it feels to me at the moment with the way the construction industry is. It's such a world away from, say, 2010, when the effect of the financial crisis hit the construction industry, and suddenly there was not very much work. And it's extraordinarily easy to get good people to do work at a competitive rate. I'm now finding it extraordinarily difficult to get good people to do work at a competitive rate within a timescale that the clients expect. So I don't know how other people are finding that, but hopefully similar.
Well, let's check some, because Emma's saying RICS says we should check their ID, so I'll look that one up afterwards. And then Mr. Henniker has come back saying, shouldn't it be the other way around? It's not the contractor should be looking at their client, which is kind of what we said, that we check our clients, but not the other way around. A big thing is, how do you actually find and then assess new contractors? You find them through Section 20s or taking over new sites. I'm sure you've got other ways of doing it, but assessing them, because I always used to find it was, you find somebody small and good, they would take photos, be on time, great price, and then they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they start turning into the person who doesn't turn up and doesn't take a photograph. And then you have to go through the next cycle of finding the next contractor that does that. Has that changed since I was doing property management 8 years ago?
Yeah, it's the same for us. Yeah, it's, there is a cycle. And with a sort of one-man band type of people who, as Martin, you said, it's difficult to get them through the process. We sort of handhold them through that process a lot more than the bigger companies. But yeah, there's always sort of ebbs and flows of contractor performance. And again, it's another aspect of the job that we have to do that we don't get paid for, is that whole kind of contractor management process. But I suppose that is part of block management. But yeah, it is tough to find people. We tend to get people more from new sites that we bring on, and we inherit contractors and then we use them for other jobs. But yeah, it's the same, Nigel.
Martin, same for you?
Yeah, same for me. Yeah, we pick up new contractors with sites. We sometimes get referrals. We sometimes get referred to people on Section 20 consultations who actually turn out to be real fines, which can be really nice. And, you know, as you say, Nigel, the nature of some contractors' businesses changes as they become more successful, or sort of diversify, or get more into one particular specialism or other, and then perhaps they become less suitable for the needs that we've got. I mean, there's another aspect to this, I think, isn't it? It's sort of the bridge between leaseholders' expectations and what's reasonable for a contractor. Because in the same way that we can't burn our bridges with our leaseholders, we can't really afford to burn our bridges with our contractors either. And sometimes I find that there's a significant tension there between how, you know, a leaseholder is asking you to absolutely take a contractor to the cleaners over something which you perhaps don't think is particularly bad as an issue. And you know that if you go and blow that up with the contractor, that's going to be the end of your useful working relationship with that person. All for the sake of perhaps an unreasonable request from one client. So, you know, it's another bit of block manager arbitration, isn't it? Constantly doing conflict management with people, and it's a bit of a tightrope to walk sometimes. But you know who are the good contractors, and you've got to try and hang on to them, haven't you? Like the good staff.
Yeah, I had one of those where the board said digging a hole to get down to a drain. This is when we looked across, we could see there's another cracked pipe. So we can do it now, or we can come back in 2 years' time and dig another hole. What do you want to do? And we put that to the board, and they said, oh, we can't possibly make that decision without a full cost-benefit analysis. And we're going, what? You want me to go to the drain digger and say, provide a cost-benefit analysis? It was just completely just out of touch with what they wanted. Bless them. What about communication with them? I mean, on a practical point of view, do you give people lots of details about where they're going to go, photographs, this is what needs to be done, and you expect them to do photographs and back? Or is it just there's something broken on such and such a site, see the security guy when you get there and fix it and send us the bill? And how do you check on that? Because I've had a case where a contractor in my own block claimed to have done a £6,000 replacement of a water tank, but I know he didn't because I live there. How do you do that sort of aspect as well? So it's managing your contractors.
Yeah, it's really difficult, isn't it? I mean, I've had a lead gutter which was supposed to be replaced for some thousands of pounds and simply wasn't. To add insult to injury, my contracts manager at the time had signed it off as well.
Oh.
So we were no longer, we had to part company with all parties involved in that sad incident, I'm afraid. And you know, that was we covered a cost. But you can't go and check everything, can you? So I guess you've got to set yourself some rules about what the reasonable expectation is in terms of cost, at which point the clients can expect you to have gone and had a look and make sure that things are okay. Communication with contractors, we tend to do it how the contractor wants to be communicated with, because that's what we find gets the best response. So, you know, we've got some guys who, for example, just love fixed flow and will do everything through fixed flow, and it's fantastic. And we've got some guys who think fixed flow is the worst possible creation ever, when all they want to do is have stuff on a text or an email, or just communicate, you know, by telephone. So we have to, I think, try and do what the contractor wants, because then, you know, you get the best out of them.
Yeah, same for us. And I think it also depends on the scale of the job as well. If it's something quite small, you know, we don't necessarily, you know, need all the bump. But if it's something bigger, more expensive, then yeah, there's more intervention. But obviously, when property managers are on site, they're expected to check any works that have been done. Sometimes the contractors will send us photographs of the work. You know what I mean? It depends on the nature of what it is.
I mean, something particularly during COVID, I remember saying, I was doing those weekly speeches about paying contractors, particularly the small guys. You know, pay them quickly and you'll get better service. They'll come to your sites before they go to anybody else's, because they know they're going to get the cash turned around quickly. And, you know, given that the interest rates were historically so terrible for clients, it wasn't really disadvantaging the clients by moving the money out of their account into the contractors' accounts quickly. But I felt, you know, if there's a way to get contractors on side, that's one way of doing it. Make sure their invoices are paid really fast, no matter what they're, you know, if they say 30 days, we'll put it at 15 or something, and get the money out of the door to them. That's my own personal thing.
Yeah, we do that as well. Yeah, if there's money available, we pay our contractors as quickly as possible. The difficulty comes when you've got particularly a small site where you've got some arrears and you start running out of money, and then that becomes obviously a very difficult thing to manage, because then you're managing two sides. You're managing the leaseholders who haven't paid the service charges, and you're managing the contractors who need to get paid. And that there's that argument of, well, we need to arrange these urgent works, but we don't quite have enough money. What do we do? So again, that becomes time consuming, challenging.
That can be a death spiral as well, can't it? In Australia, the second highest complaint to their ombudsman is the strata owners taking their own association to court for not doing works. And what happens is somebody doesn't pay. There's no forfeiture out there, so the works don't get done because there's enough money. So other people say, well, I'm not paying them because this place is a dump and I can't rent it out. And it just goes into a death spiral, unfortunately. We call them zombie apartments. I think Canada's got the same. Tricky one. We've got a couple of minutes left. James had a specific one. Is a driving license sufficient to satisfy a requirement for a small contractor ID? My instinct would be yes, because whenever I've been asked to do ID, it's been either copy of passport or photo driving license application, because that has a government stricture around it.
Yeah, I would have thought so. Yeah,
I think so. Any other last words of wisdom on how to manage contractors? As I say, that to me, I found was always the most challenging bit, because they're the people who can make your life miserable or happy, and make your leaseholders miserable or happy. So contractor management was always a really, really important part. Quite difficult, as you say, Martin. Every single contractor is different, and you have to sort of have a different face for each one.
I think it's about investing in the relationship with your contractors. Again, going back to that human thing, where obviously some of them are quite large companies, but where you can invest in building up a good relationship, I think that's a key step in the process.
Yeah. Martin, any last words of wisdom?
Yeah, no, but it's tricky, isn't it? It's our service delivery relies on third parties.
Yeah.
It's a difficult model.
Yeah. And as I remember, it was Emma Blaney who once said that people, when they first have a blown light bulb, their dad changes it 2 minutes later, and they don't understand why in property management it takes 2 weeks or so. So you're on the back foot always with your maintenance.
Yeah. And 65 quid, Nigel, for a light bulb. If you can get the Sparky's call, that always goes down well, doesn't it, at AGMs? So.
Yeah, how much are you doing on that one? Yeah. All right, I personally thank both of you for your time and your trouble, and for answering questions on the hoof. It's not easy. There's a couple of contacts there if you use the QR code, if you want to join Shelley and myself on LinkedIn. Martin is a man of mystery, and avoids LinkedIn, I think, like the plague. But thank you both for your time and your trouble. As we mentioned earlier, there will be a recording of this session available for you, which Fixler will send out, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks to everybody for coming in as well. Thanks, bye.
Bye.